Look, I never claimed to be any sort of orator, but when I hear a word like big, it brings to mind certain connotations, certain ideas, namely something large. So imagine my shock when Big Dig came in the mail in this tiny little package. Big Dig is a game released by Tasty Minstrel Games, designed by Scott Huntington and Sean Graham. The first player to complete all 3 of the randomly chosen goals wins the game. The players receive identical player boards and a dry erase pen. 3 goals from a deck are chosen at random. These determine the win conditions. The 5 dig cards are placed in the center of the table. On a player's turn, they take one of the remaining cards from the center of the table and draw the depicted shape onto their player board, or if they prefer, cross out a single square. Certain spots on the board can only be dug through by using an entire card to do this. Shapes drawn must be either connected to the surface of their map or connected to an existing shape. Once all the cards have been taken from the center of the table, players return all that they've taken and flip them, showing a new set of shapes now available. The goals vary from game to game. Players could be racing to dig up all the emeralds, bust through a set number of stones, or pipe the oil to the truck, among other things. The first player to complete all 3 goals on their turn wins. Jumping straight into negatives, and honestly one of the biggest issues with this game is nothing really as far as mechanics go. It's simply that it's not an incredibly exciting or engrossing game. Now, granted, it's somewhat of an abstract game in that you're just drawing shapes on a board to complete random goals. Now, those goals slap very well with the theme. When you're digging in a hole, I assume I've really only assisted once and not very well. You don't look at the plans for the day and say, oh, okay, we're going to be doing a cross section here, a square, and then a squiggly line. But it's not engrossing, and with that short play time, it's not something that I necessarily would expect to be engrossing. And then there's the shapes. You really only get 5 possibilities at a time, and when your turn rolls around, that could be down to 2 or even 1. And then there's 5 different shapes that'll pop up throughout the course of the game. It's a clever little idea, but felt like it could have used some more options for the players, because when your turn rolls around, I mean, you can use an entire shape to blow up a single block, or you could try to fit in sort of an odd-shaped thing that you've got left over to fit with your plan and your board. And it's because of that, it's because the choices that you make are draw a shape or cross out a single block, the turns can get a little stale. And they could certainly get even more stale if this game were bigger or had a longer playing time. But it doesn't. And that is the key. This game, despite being called Big Dig, is a very small game. And that is its biggest benefit. I love that this game comes in this size of a box. Traditionally, that size box was left over for card games. You looked at something like that and you thought, oh, there's a card game in there. No, you've got an entire roll and write game, or flip and write, or whatever. It's got cards, it's got dry erase boards, it's got pens, and everything that fits in the most compact flip and write game box that I've ever seen. I mean, it's literally a pocket game. I can put it, I've just put it in my pocket. It's something that I can take anywhere. If you've got a game this size that has this amount of box space, and it's any sort of spatial reasoning game, generally it's going to be a card game that sort of eats up a lot of table space. Because there's dry erase boards, because there's a minimal amount of cards. This game is small, it's got a small footprint, and it's an entirely different flavor of games than you normally see in this size packaging, which is super, super cool. And playing right into that is the whole presentation, everything from the graphic design to the art, to how they fit everything into the box insert. It works super, super well. The art is fantastic. As I said, the game's a little bit of an abstract game, but the art and the theme, everything fits so well with it that you look at it and you can't help but be a little bit charmed, which TMG, especially with their small box games, does really well. And I mentioned in a previous review of a TMG game that they kind of lack some of that sheen, especially on their larger games, I'd say, but in this instance, I feel like that they really nailed it. Sure, maybe it's not the most exciting game to play, but it's a pretty darn good game for a game that lasts 20 minutes, is so easy to teach, and looks so great. The last positive that I mentioned for this, I've already alluded to, is the fact that it's portable. Still in my pocket right now. It's a game that I have pulled out and set up on an airplane tray table, and it worked just fine. A game like that you can play with 2 to 4 players is pretty sweet. Big Dig's going up against a lot of competition, especially in recent years with sort of this renaissance of roll and write, flip and write games out there. Gone are the days of Yahtzee and Farkle. Big Dig comes onto the scene and is competing against Kokoro Avenue the Kodama, On Tour, Welcome To, among others. And I'm going to point out that Big Dig can't stand up to those. Big Dig is not as good a games as the 3 that I just mentioned now, and I would prefer to play those 3 over Big Dig. But if you know you like this, or you're at all interested, or you're looking for something that you can take easy, yes, look into Big Dig. The fact that it accomplishes what it sets out to do so well is what makes it shine for me. Big Dig is a race to riches and glory Big Dig ends up being a race to riches and glory for... Big Dig ends up being a race for riches and glory for players... Big Dig ends up being a race for glory and riches for 1 to 4 players in about 15 to 30 minutes.